Good morning, friends and enemies. Today we are playing Dynasty Keep Trade Cut. So 3 players with similar Dynasty values are going to pop up on the screen, and I'm going to go through and tell you which of those I would keep, which I would trade to some poor schmuck in your league, and who I'd cut. Land them on the waiver wire, all right? For each one, I'll give you a little bit of reasoning, a little bit of seasoning behind my decision, and then we'll move on to the next one. So here's how this is going to work. We're going to go over to keeptradecut.com. Some of you might be familiar with this. It's a pretty popular resource in the Dynasty space. And basically, they have crowdsourced rankings on their website. And the way that they make their rankings is by you going to the rankings, and then they will pop up this screen asking you to keep, trade, or cut a specific player. And then based on that, they start to outsource their rankings based on your answers of how the community starts to rank. Do I think it's a perfect, flawless process? Absolutely not, but I think it gives you some nice feedback in the ballpark of where players should be. Now, I have not done this before. I don't know if this has been done before. Like, the keep, trade, cut concept is obviously not a new thing just in the content space, but I have not looked around to see if anyone has actually done this particular type of content where they went on keep, trade, cut to do it. But this is a free resource. You can go check it out for yourself if you need a little bit more guidance on Dynasty rankings, trade calculator, or whatever. So if you go over the rankings here, you'll get a little bit of a pop-up. Now, sometimes they're a little bit all over the place. They're a little bit clunky, at least at this time of the year, because of rookies getting interjected into it, but we'll see what we get. And then we just kind of keep opening new tabs as new ones pop up for us. We might have to go over to incognito window. Okay, so this is the first one that pops up. Colby, Parkinson, Tommy Tremble, and Daniel Bellinger. We have half PPR. We've got a 12-teamer, no tight end premium. I think the stats are pretty much going to stay the same. And these keep, trade, cut, hopefully they're helpful because they're going to be a super wide range of players. Like, there was one that I was going to start off with, which I think I'm going to jump back to because I opened up a tab before, that I think is a little bit more enticing. And that was this one: Justin Jefferson, Joe Burrow, and Jayden Daniels. So as you could see, they kind of range anywhere from, you know, the Tommy Trembles of the world to the Joe Burrows of the world. So it's an interesting conversation. Hopefully you guys enjoy the video here. So we'll jump into this first one. We have Jefferson, Joe Burrow, and Jayden Daniels. You keep one, you trade one, and you cut one. So in this type of scoring setting, Superflex is obviously on, half PPR, no tight end premium, no tight ends here, so it does not matter. Obviously, in a Superflex league, the highest priority players are those of the quarterbacks, especially the elite ones. Now, you have a name like Justin Jefferson. All 3 of these guys are going to be first-round startup picks overall. You can kind of see the rankings on the left side here. Right now, the way that the community has them, as Jayden Daniels is the number 2 overall player, Justin Jefferson is the number 5 overall player, and Joe Burrow is the number 7 overall player. Here's my thinking. If I am building a roster, or if I'm starting a Dynasty draft and I have a top 6 or 7 pick, I am very likely walking away with some sort of a quarterback. Like, I want to staple my team to a quarterback, almost how like the hero running back strategy has gotten popular over the last few years when you're doing, you know, just normal redraft leagues. You know, you get your high end, your elite running back in the first round, and then, you know, figure out running back 2 later on. Like, that's kind of a replaceable option. That's usually what I'm trying to do in a startup draft as it relates to quarterbacks here. So, I mean, I think the obvious one would be to keep Jayden Daniels, right? There's probably not really a more prized possession when you start to accumulate youth, when you start to look at the big picture, the direction of the team. Just what he did as a rookie was one of the most impressive rookie years statistically that we've seen in maybe ever, and just the success that the team had. Obviously, you want to attach yourself to someone like Jayden Daniels, who has the rushing upside, who has this like insane floor and ceiling of what can happen over the next, you know, decade, half a decade, whatever. And when you look at Washington, like, they're just getting started, obviously, right? Like, they had Terry McLaurin and basically nobody else. Like, Zach Ertz was their next best pass catcher, and you could be damn sure that they're going to now start to pepper and surround this dude with as many weapons as humanly possible going forward. So they will be in the sweepstakes for a very, very highly talented second wide receiver to pair with Terry McLaurin. I just think, obviously, wheels are up for Jayden Daniels. That is a take about as spicy as ketchup over here. So Jayden Daniels is going to be the keep. Now, when you look at the other players, like trade and cut, you can, you know, start to like try to differentiate the difference. Like, you know, am I going to pepper in trade value versus like how I actually just value the specific player itself? I think in this scoring setting, when it's half PPR, and unfortunately I don't know how to make it full PPR. So like this is just the way that we're going to have to ride this out. Obviously, wide receivers take a little bit of a hit. Like quarterbacks are just scoring way more than a wide receiver is in this setting. And Joe Burrow, like 28 years old, a little bit older than Jefferson, but obviously the lifespan of a quarterback is a lot longer. Burrow's got that contract in Cincinnati. Jamar Chase is going to be tied up there, you know, hopefully. And from what we're hearing on Twitter, it sounds like T. Higgins is going to be a Bengal for at least the next year, if not locking him up for a long-term deal. So those three together means fireworks, means magic. And like Joe Burrow, again, just anchoring your dynasty team is a player that I want. So I guess if we're going to talk about valuing the player correctly, I'm going to trade Burrow because I think you probably get more value for him in a Superflex half PPR league. And then we're going to cut Justin Jefferson. So we submit, and like those numbers go into the rankings of Keep Trade Cut. I wouldn't imagine something like that really moves the needle too much. You know, just one vote. They have up here this little message. Keep Trade Cut's Dynasty Fantasy Football Rankings crowdsource the current market value of players and picks from over 19 million data points and counting, provided by users like yourself. So I've opened up a few new tabs that just have different players on them. So we'll kind of just like keep going down there, and that's how this video will go. All right. So we have Gabe Davis, Jahan Dotson, and Cam Skattebo. So Cam is a running back coming out. Like some of you guys might have watched him in the college football playoffs. He plays for Arizona State. Played against Texas. They lost 39-31, but he ran for like a $140, 2 touchdowns, and Texas is a very good run defense. So like, you know, he got put on the map. He had a fantastic season. He was actually second in the NCAA in rushing yards. He had over like 1,700 behind Ashton Genty. So he'll be like a hyped up guy. He's a white running back, so people are just gonna be like, he's a dog, whatever. He's gonna be slow and he's gonna be fat, but like he'll fucking run people over, that kind of dude. So when I look at these three players, it's obviously very easy to get excited about rookie running backs coming in. When I've looked at mock drafts, Cam usually lands in day 3 around round 4, but I have seen some where he's crept up into round 3, day 2 draft capital. And I'll tell you, man, if he lands in like a good spot that has some openings, right? Like if the Raiders pass on Genty and they take him in the 3rd round, or the Chargers take him somewhere and give him that Gus Edwards role, I think that could be really enticing. So I'm going to keep him. Now, Gabe Davis, Jahan Dotson, like Dotson, the red flags are all over the place. Like you're a 1st round draft pick and you're already on your 2nd team. You know, you're kind of buried beneath AJ Brown. You are buried beneath Devonta Smith. I'd like to think Jahan Dotson is just a better player than Gabe Davis. Gabe Davis did get the contract from Jacksonville, but now he's like really, really buried underneath Brian Thomas Jr. after that breakout. He's buried underneath Evan Ingram. They now have Shane Waldron out there in Jacksonville, which is going to be a fucking nightmare for that offense. So I have very little faith in Gabe Davis and him being any fantasy relevant to your team over the next whatever years. So I'm actually going to cut him. I'm going to trade Jahan Dotson. Maybe he gets a little hype coming off this Super Bowl run that Philly had. Like the great Ari Gold once said, once a star, always a threat. And we're going to ride Jahan Dotson's 1st round capital. And maybe that route running will give us a peek, will give us a glimpse back into the player that he once was. So we're keeping Cam, we are trading Jahan, and we are cutting Gabe Davis. We'll do this one quickly. This might be like the WOT 60 seconds of content I've ever made. We got Colby Parkinson, the Rams tight end. We got Tommy Tremble, the Carolina tight end. And we have Daniel Bellinger, the New York Giants tight end. I mean, you have 2 younger tight ends in Daniel Bellinger and Tommy Tremble who have 2 coming off of their rookie season tight ends that outplayed them and are probably the future of the position for those teams. You have Theo Johnson for New York, who ended up on the IR. And you also have Ja'Tavion Sanders, who was playing really well with Bryce Young and then got hurt as well. So we didn't get to see him really make the impact that it looked like he was about to have during his rookie season. So it's hard to be excited about either of these guys. I think I'm just going to cut Tommy Tremble off the rip because I have more faith in Ja'Tavion Sanders. Maybe there's a world where Daniel Bellinger gets back onto the field and, you know, runs in 2 tight end sets, I guess. So we'll trade him. We're going to keep Colby Parkinson just because he got a little hype this year at some point, and Tyler Higbee's getting up there in age, coming off of injuries. He is on contract for 1 more year through 2025, so it doesn't look like Higbee will be cut or released or in another city come next year, but you never know. So I guess we'll keep Colby Parkinson. We'll just get the fuck out of this one. All right, this is a cool one. We got DK Metcalf. We've got a 2027 late 1st, and we've got Shedeur Sanders. So off the rip, Shedeur kind of pops off the page to me, regardless of what you think of him as a talent, regardless of what you think of him as a player. This is very likely going to be a quarterback that gets drafted in the top 5, is mobile, will be relatively good for fantasy, if not very, very good. And like, that's one I'm just not about to overthink, especially when the other options on the board in DK and the 2027 late first are not overly enticing. Like, that's an easy keep for me just because of the positional scarcity at quarterback in a super flex league. So now we're looking at DK and a 2027 late first. Now this is going to come down to like what your team looks like, because realistically these are kind of two opposing assets, right? Like DK at 27, that's not old, but it's very likely that his value doesn't really go up from here and only declines. It could stay where it is right now, you know, like a decent value for the next 2-3 years and not really dip off. But when you look at picks, like the value insulation of a rookie pick is something that I think a lot of people overlook. Because the 2027 late first, right? Obviously, the later you push this, the less valuable it is to you. Just speaking from a practical standpoint, like your dynasty league might not even be fucking operating at this point, but like you having to wait 3 years to make this pick, time is money, all right? And that is real as it comes to dynasty picks. But literally every day that goes by, value goes up on this pick. So there is no point in which this pick gets less valuable as time goes by. Whereas DK, like, sure, he can go out and have a 1,600 yard, 14 touchdown season next year, and his value does spike. But we now have like a 5-year-ish, 6-year sample size of what DK Metcalf is. So his range of outcomes is very, very steady. And we know probably where he's going to land. We know he's going to be, in terms of like points per game, probably like a back end wide receiver 2. And that's good value, right? It's nice to have that on your team. But at the end of the day, like, this late first is something that the value will continue to go up and then hit a peak, obviously, around 2027. You know, because of that, you have a lot of flexibility. You could trade it at any time for a different player of value. But again, like, I think if you're competing, I'm fine going with DK Metcalf here. I think if you are in a rebuilding state, or if you have depth, like if you have 3 to 4 wide receiver 2s on your team, I'm fine going with the late first here. 2027 is kind of a push. It's 3 years down the line at this point. So like maybe it takes a little bit of a dip here. But overall, I do think just like having these firsts in your bag is pretty slept on here. So I'm going to trade the first and I'm going to cut DK. Okay, this is an interesting one. We have RJ Harvey, he's a rookie coming out. RJ Harvey is a smaller, extremely explosive back at a UCF. I think he's likely to be a day 3 pick, which would almost certainly, you know, as much as you like a player, day 3 picks don't have a great track record. Tyrone Tracy, great. Bucky Irving, great. Obviously, you know, there are things that happen, but for every one of those, there are like 10 backs that do not hit. So for the most part, I think we've seen both of these guys, Dobbins and Tank Bigsby, be good at the NFL level for the most part. So I think I would just automatically probably cut RJ Harvey. I think there's a case to be made that J.K. Dobbins' injury history and his age could put him into that cut category. When I think of the Chargers offense, though, again, it's probably a team I want to attach myself to. Dobbins played well enough to the point where, like, if you're looking at the future of the Chargers, I think there's a really good chance that they draft a running back or prioritize one in free agency. They see what Saquon did to Philly and how they transformed that offense by, paying a worthy running back a little bit of a bag there and being able to rely on him. So there's definitely a path where that ends up being the future for the Chargers. But I also think Dobbins was damn good in his own right. And I think if they look at the future and if they look at the running back free agent market and they see a bruiser back available that they can sign for, 2 years, $8 million, 2 years, $10 million to take that, basically do what they did with Gus Edwards again, but with a better version of Gus Edwards. I think they can go down that route in which J.K. Dobbins could put together some nice years. Ultimately, though, I think I'm actually going to keep Tank Bigsby there because if we look at the year that Tank Bigsby had, I'd almost look at last year as his rookie year, right? Like his rookie year was atrocious. He came in as a different player last year and outplayed Travis Etienne by almost every single metric. He is 23 years old. He has day 2 draft capital. He was clearly part of their plans here. They have a new coaching staff coming in, which does not guarantee that like Travis Etienne's draft capital means anything for this team. They did pick up his 5th-year option, so Etienne will be back in Jacksonville this year. But I liked what we saw at Tank Bigsby, man. He was one of the more efficient runners on the ground, and just having his age all the way down there at 23, coming off of like a nice year, if he builds on what he did last year, if he just, whatever he did from rookie to sophomore year, like do that shit again, So I kind of like Tank here. I'm going to trade J.K. Dobbins because I think you'll probably get more value than a day 3 rookie on the back of just the year that he had and convincing someone that there's not a draft pick for the Chargers to be had. All right, we got a haymaker here. We've got James Cook, a 2025 mid-first, and a 2027 early first. So James Cook obviously coming off of a monster fucking year. Dude is scoring multiple touchdowns a game for the most part. With James Cook, I felt like it was easy to buy low after last season. And now touchdowns vary so drastically. Like he just had an Aaron Jones type season, you know, where Aaron Jones, if y'all remember, like when he broke out as a fantasy player, it was like him scoring 16, 17 rushing touchdowns, being attached to Aaron Rodgers and being the primary goal line back. Those things can change very quickly. Obviously, just being attached to the Bills offense is something that you want. But I do think there are enough moving parts here where, like, don't get me wrong, I think James Cook will be a really solid, like, low-end RB1 for you for the next, year, 2 years, whatever. Good pass catcher all around, though they don't really throw to their backs that often. I think there's just, like, enough red flags to me. Like, if I had to project where James Cook's touchdown lines are going to be for next year when, like, the underdogs put up their season-long props, I would say it's probably going to be around like 8.5. So to expect the touchdown line that he had this year would obviously be crazy. There's going to be a dip in that sort of production. But like, that's not to say just because a player has like regression does not mean that they're not a good fantasy player. I hate that argument in fantasy where it's like, oh, this player's due for regression. It's like, sure, but they can still finish as the fucking RB9 and be great for your fantasy team. So that's kind of the way I'm looking at James Cook. Like, he's a low-end RB1 for me for right now, but I think the touchdowns are going to come down. They obviously really like Ray Davis. They like Ty Johnson. I think both of them played really, really well this year. That's going to be a three-way committee for sure. And then, of course, you always add Josh Allen in on the goal line, taking away those touchdowns. But we also saw him do that this year with James Cook going crazy. And I also think that offense will probably only get better as these receivers get better too. So there's a lot to like about James Cook, but I will say, when I talk about the mid-first, like a 2025 mid-first, if you're in like full rebuild, you're without a doubt going with, one of the picks here. If you're like 2 to 3 years off of a rebuild right now, I'd go with the early first. But because that's so far down the road, that wouldn't be my first inclination. My first thought would be to keep the 2025 mid-first. And obviously that's a really enticing pick. Like having a mid-first this year happening right now. The overall class is not a super, super strong one. A mid-first, you're likely getting maybe one of the quarterbacks. I think in a super flex league, for the most part, like you'll have Ashton Genty, and then it'll be a mixed bag. It's probably going to be, if they end up getting top 5 draft capital, Cam Ward, Shedeur Sanders in some order or another, as long as something drastic doesn't happen with them falling out of, the early round of the NFL draft. And then you're going to have your pick of like, does someone love Caleb Johnson? Does someone love Amon-Ra Hampton? Does someone love a running back that maybe sneaks into the back of the first round, day 2 draft capital? Otherwise, it's the first wide receiver off the board. So it's not like an extremely strong middle pack. But the reason that I would probably take this pick is what you can do with the next thing. And this is one of those trades I might be looking to take this pick and then immediately move it for an upgrade at the running back position, right? Like if you look at the other running backs, just like in the rankings per se, I think you can probably add something to this first and upgrade pretty dramatically from James Cook in terms of just like dynasty value, right? Like obviously his production this year was crazy, so it's a little bit tough to upgrade from that standpoint. But like you got a mid-first right now, I almost think that might be enticing enough to grab like a Devon Achane at the right time, right? Like it's easy to be like, oh, I just traded James Cook for a 2025 mid-first. Why would I now trade Achane, who is, KTC's RB4? But then, like, in a vacuum, if you go to the Achane owner and say, like, hey, I'll give you a mid-first. We don't know what's happening in Miami right now. Like, their offense is kind of all over the place. Like, that might be a trade that you just might be able to do straight up. But more likely, you could add something else to this mid-first and then maybe grab an even higher valued running back here. Like you might be able to jump up to the 101 and grab Genty if you add a back end first, right? Or a player like a fucking George Pickens or something like that. You might be able to add another first if you have it. Like if this is the 105, you add the 107, maybe you can get like Bijan. You know what I mean? Like you can massively upgrade the running back position by adding something on top of this. Like this is such a valuable piece, just a mid first, regardless of what year it is, like obviously players are going to look at the rankings of specific players in that year and then value it accordingly. But for the most part, like people just want to have first round picks because it's kind of fun. It's like one of the more fun parts of playing in Dynasty. So I think with this, I'm almost looking at a double-sided trade where it's like I'm taking the mid first so that I can now package something else with it to upgrade that position. So I'm going to take the 2025 mid first as my keep. And then again, depending on where you're at in terms of like the lifespan of your team, obviously, if you are rebuilding, the 2027 early first would be my first inclination here. If you are competing for a championship right now, I'm probably going to take James Cook again, unless you have, you know, 3 running backs that are really good that will go into your lineup immediately and you don't feel like you need this production, and maybe you prepare for the future as well. So we're going to trade this and cut that. All right, we'll get into one more. It's getting kind of long. Let me know what you guys think of this video. Do you like this format? I know it's a lot of just like rambling and me just fucking yapping right now. We're 26-ish minutes in. I could do more of these. I could do one of these weekly if you feel like it is helpful for y'all, or if you have any suggestions on how to improve that, drop it in the comments down below. If you're down there, make sure you hit the button that looks like this as well, and subscribe to the channel if you're new. We got one more haymaker to round this out. We got CeeDee Lamb, we got Amon-Ra St. Brown, and we've got Brian Thomas Jr. Now, if you look at the rankings, CeeDee Lamb is the 12th overall player, Amon-Ra St. Brown is 15, and Brian Thomas Jr. is 14. So they're all in that same tier for the most part. They're all in tier 4, actually. It's CeeDee, Puka, Brian Thomas Jr., and Amon-Ra St. Brown. So I don't think you can really go wrong. I will say in half PPR, Amon-Ra St. Brown probably takes a little bit of a dip here. I love the stability. You're kind of talking about like tantalizing youth with Brian Thomas Jr. You're talking about pure upside with CeeDee Lamb, and then you're talking about a beautiful floor with Amon-Ra St. Brown. You know what you're going to get from him for the most part, coming off of another great year. Like the Detroit Lions have very, very, very little chance of being a bad offense anytime soon. So you like being attached to that. I think ultimately what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep CeeDee Lamb because I think, listen, if Dak is healthy, like CeeDee Lamb is going to probably jump right back into his 2023 production. Brian Thomas Jr. just had, you know, one of the better rookie years of all time for a wide receiver, but I do think this would not be a terrible time to trade him on the hype of what he's coming off of. Like the fact that, okay, Malik Neighbors is ranked 7 spots ahead of Brian Thomas Jr. That's a pretty big gap, but I don't disagree with it. I think Malik Neighbors is unbelievably talented, and I can't wait to see him with a real quarterback. But I do think like Brian Thomas Jr.'s value is crazy right now, and I'm worried about Shane Waldron coming in there, man. So Liam Cohen is cool, a little weird, a little quirky. We'll see. We'll see what happens there. But I will say, like, Brian Thomas Jr. feels like if you have any questions about him, this is a perfect time to trade him for a massive surplus of players, of value, of picks, of whatever you really want to do here. And then I will cut Amon-Ra St. Brown because I think Lamb and Brian Thomas Jr. have probably a yearly similar upside prop, if not Lamb probably being higher, a little bit older, obviously. But I just like the Dallas offense a little bit more than what we've seen from Jacksonville here. But Brian Thomas Jr., in terms of just having him as an asset and just the value, feels a lot better than Amon-Ra St. Brown because I think people are just kind of cool on Amon-Ra. Like, he's great to have, obviously, if you have him. This is half PPR, though, too. So if it's not full PPR, Amon-Ra's value takes a decent dip, right? He's probably no longer like an 18 to 19 point per game guy. He probably dips down to around 14, whereas like BTJ and CeeDee Lamb just stay making massive fucking plays week after week after week down the field, which makes your heyday in one single snap. So that's the way we're going to go here. And we're going to end the video right there, okay? So that was Keep Trade Cut. Played with a lot of good players, played with a lot of bad players. That's just the way that this thing goes. Again, you can go check out keeptradecut.com. All the resources that were shown today are absolutely free. That'll be linked down below. And again, while you are down there, make sure you hit the button that looks like this. Make sure you tell your friends and enemies about this video and subscribe to the channel if you are new. I will see y'all, I don't know, in a couple days probably. Smoochies.